Before starting the story, let us know where you're watching from and what time you're watching. The man in the corner of your eye. Chapter 1. The first glimpse. Ethan had always prided himself on being a rational man. Logic, science, and facts governed his life. Ghosts, monsters, and things that go bump in the night. Fairy tales for the weak-minded. But rationality does little when the rules of reality begin to blur. It started subtly. A fleeting shadow at the edge of his vision. A figure standing in the corner of a room, vanishing the moment he turned his head. At first, he dismissed it as eye floaters, maybe exhaustion from late-night work sessions. But then, it happened more frequently. He would be brushing his teeth, and in the reflection of the mirror, he'd catch the faintest glimpse of a man standing just beyond the doorway. Turning swiftly, he'd find nothing. The presence was never there when directly observed, only lingering in the edges of his sight, always watching, always waiting. Chapter 2. Unwelcome company. Ethan tried to rationalize it away, but the sightings became impossible to ignore. The figure was always just beyond focus, standing at the street corner, lurking in his living room, even appearing in his office during late hours. A shape draped in shadow, its details blurred, as though reality itself refused to fully acknowledge its existence. His friends noticed his unease. "You look like hell, man," Mark commented over drinks one evening. "You sleeping okay?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just been seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Probably stress." Mark chuckled. "Hallucinations? Dude, take a break. Maybe get some sleep." Sleep. A luxury he hadn't enjoyed in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt watched, as if something stood at the foot of his bed, lingering just out of sight, waiting for him to let his guard down. Chapter 3. The photograph. Determined to prove his paranoia unfounded, Ethan set up cameras in his apartment. If there was nothing there, then he could finally put his fears to rest. He let the footage run overnight. The next morning he reviewed it. Hours of nothing. Just an empty apartment. Until 3:13 a.m. The screen flickered, static crackling for a brief second. And then there it was. A man, standing in the farthest corner of the living room, unmoving, unblinking. Ethan's breath hitched. He rewound the footage, heart pounding. The man was there, barely distinguishable, his features shrouded in darkness, but there was no mistaking it. Someone or something had been in his apartment. But the most horrifying part, the moment the clock struck 3:14, the figure didn't disappear. Instead, it moved closer. Chapter 4. The Whisper. Ethan no longer felt safe in his own home. He stayed at Mark's place for a few nights, but the presence followed him. It didn't matter where he was. The man lingered at the periphery, always waiting. One night, as Ethan lay in bed, too exhausted to move, he heard it for the first time. A whisper. Soft. Indistinct. A voice that seemed to echo from just behind his ear, though he was alone. "You see me?" Ethan shot up, drenched in sweat. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a figure that wasn't there, but he knew it was. It always was. Chapter 5. Descent into Madness. The more Ethan acknowledged the entity, the more real it became. It started to creep closer, no longer content to linger in the periphery. It stood at the threshold of doorways, in reflections, behind the glass of windows. Its presence was an unrelenting pressure, suffocating and paralyzing. He stopped going to work, stopped answering calls. His world shrank to the confines of his apartment, yet even there, he found no safety. The walls seemed thinner, the shadows darker, the whispers louder. "You see me. I see you." The words slithered into his mind, foreign yet familiar. A message, a warning, or perhaps a promise. Chapter 6. The final revelation. On the last night, Ethan made a decision. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't hide. He would confront it. He sat in the center of his living room, eyes wide, refusing to blink. "Show yourself," he demanded, his voice trembling. For the first time, the presence obeyed. The air grew heavy, the temperature plummeting. The shadows in the corners of the room twisted, lengthened, and then, slowly, the figure emerged. A man, or something that once was. His face was a shifting blur, like a distortion in a faulty video feed. His eyes, if they could be called, that were pits of infinite darkness, voids that threatened to consume Ethan entirely. And then it spoke, clear and crisp. You were never supposed to look. Pain seared through Ethan's skull. His vision blurred. His body convulsed. The world collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the shadows that had once been content to remain unseen. Epilogue. A new watcher. Weeks later, Mark received a call. Ethan had vanished. No trace, no explanation. But Mark noticed something strange. In the days following his disappearance, he began catching glimpses of movement in the corners of his vision, a shadow standing at the edge of his room, a whisper curling against his ear. One night, as he turned off the lights, he caught his reflection in a mirror. And there, just beyond his shoulder, stood a figure, watching, waiting. And then it whispered, "You see me."